You ever have one of those mornings when everything feels calm, and then, in the span of a few seconds, someone decides to ruin it? That's exactly how my day turned. The rain had ended not long ago, leaving the pavement slick and the air fresh with that earthy smell you only get after a storm. I was standing near the front entrance of our local library, holding a folder tight against my chest, waiting for my daughter's tutoring session to wrap up. I wasn't in a hurry. I had spent the morning at the community centre, helping an older neighbour with her housing forms, and I was looking forward to going home, making lunch, maybe even enjoying a quiet coffee before the rest of the day caught up to me. That's when I heard it, the low, smooth hum of an engine. It sounded expensive, the kind of sound you notice before you even see the car. A gleaming pearl-white luxury sport utility vehicle came into view, its polished chrome catching the light, tyres hugging the curb a little too close to where I stood. I assumed the driver would slow down, seeing the wide puddle stretching along the edge of the sidewalk. But instead, the vehicle picked up speed. The water surged up in a heavy wave, smacking against me with a cold, muddy splash that soaked through my sweater and jeans. The folder slipped in my hands, and the papers inside bent under the weight of the water. Before I could even take a breath, the driver's window rolled down. A woman with perfect hair, oversized sunglasses, and a diamond ring that flashed in the morning light looked straight at me. There was a smirk on her face, the kind that doesn't just look down on you, but laughs at you. "Maybe next time," she said, her voice sugary but sharp, "you'll stand somewhere you belong." I stood frozen, water dripping from my hair, not because I didn't know what to say, but because of how she said it. Like I didn't matter, like I didn't belong on the very street I'd lived on for years. She gave a little laugh, almost proud of herself, then pulled forward a few feet. I crouched to gather my papers, ignoring the way my hands trembled. It wasn't from the cold, it was from something else entirely. What she didn't realise, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that this wasn't the last time we'd see each other. And the next time, the power wouldn't be in her hands. She didn't drive off right away. Instead, she stayed there with her window halfway down, as if she was waiting for me to say something, maybe to apologise for standing on a public sidewalk she thought she owned. "You people never learn," she said, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Always hanging around where you don't belong, making the place look bad." A couple of people passing by slowed their steps. One man paused at the corner, pretending to check his phone while his eyes darted toward us. An older woman stepped out of the library clutching a tote bag of books and froze for a second when she saw me dripping wet. Nobody said a word, they just watched. I could have shouted back, I could have told her exactly what I thought of her, but I didn't. I bent down and picked up a page from my folder, a page now stained and curling at the edges, before it blew away in the light wind. It had a city seal on the top and detailed diagrams that only meant something to someone who knew what they were looking at. She noticed it, leaning a little closer. "What's that? More paperwork for free handouts?" Her laugh was sharp, like she was performing for an audience. I took my time stacking the papers back in order, my fingers smoothing the damp edges. "Just work documents," I said, my voice calm. "Oh, please," she scoffed, tilting her head. "Work? What kind of work could you possibly have?" Her tone made it clear. She'd already decided who I was, and nothing I said would change her mind. I didn't answer her. Not yet. Instead, I pressed the folder against my chest and straightened up, meeting her eyes for the first time. Her smile faltered for just a second. Behind her, I noticed the reflection in the polished surface of her car. The onlookers, the small crowd forming, the way people's faces had shifted from curiosity to something closer to disapproval. They might not have spoken up yet, but they were paying attention, and so was I. Because in that moment, I realised something. The power she thought she had, it only worked if I gave it to her. And I wasn't planning on doing that. Her voice grew louder, as if she wanted everyone within earshot to hear. "I pay more in property taxes in 1 year than you probably make in 5, she said, her chin lifting just a little higher. "People like you are exactly why neighbourhoods go downhill. You can't even afford a car, and you stand there acting like you belong here." The words didn't sting the way she probably hoped they would. They just told me more about her than she realised. I glanced down at my sweater, still dripping, and the folder in my hands. The paper on top was one of the more important ones, the ink smudged but still legible. It was part of a set of plans I'd been reviewing earlier in the day, though I doubted she'd recognise what she was looking at. "What's so important in there anyway?" she asked, leaning her elbow on the doorframe. "Another complaint form? A letter to the city begging for assistance?" I met her gaze. "These are work documents." Her laugh was quick and sharp. "Sure they are. What do you do? Clean houses? Babysit?" I let the question hang in the air, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I knew she wouldn't believe it. And honestly, I didn't feel like proving myself to someone who had already decided I was beneath her. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A teenage boy on a bike had stopped at the end of the block watching us. The older woman from the library was still standing near the entrance, her tote bag dangling from one arm. Their eyes kept flicking between me and the woman in the driver's seat. She must have sensed she was losing some of her audience's approval, because her tone shifted, trying to sound more authoritative. "You know," she said, "I'm friends with people on the city council. I've been pushing them to get rid of this library entrance. Too many outsiders hanging around." That caught my attention, not because of what she said, but because I knew exactly who she was talking to on that council. And I knew they'd never promised her anything close to what she imagined. I adjusted my grip on the folder, my thumb brushing over the raised city seal on one of the documents. I didn't say it out loud yet, but in my mind, the pieces were already clicking into place. She had no idea how close she was to stepping right into her own mess. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I shifted the folder under my arm and pulled out my phone. The screen was smudged with water, but it lit up just fine. I scrolled to a contact and hit call. "Hi, Janet," I said, my voice steady. "Yeah, I'm out near the Maple Street Library right now. I know I wasn't supposed to check in until tomorrow, but something's come up with the site inspection for the neighbourhood project. Can you pull the file for the Brooks property?" "Yes, the large white house on the corner of Sycamore Lane." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her stiffen. Her hand tightened around the steering wheel. She didn't say anything, but her head tilted, as if she was trying to figure out if she'd heard me right. "Thank you," I continued into the phone. "I'll be in the office later today. And Janet, go ahead and make a note for me to review their permit history in detail." I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my pocket. When I finally looked at her, the smirk was gone. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the sudden tension in her face. "You know my house?" she asked, her tone sharper now. I gave a small nod. "It's hard to miss. You've done a lot of changes to it." She swallowed, her jaw tightening. "What is it you do exactly?" I almost smiled, but stopped myself. "Let's just say I work in a part of the city where I get to make sure people follow the rules." Her fingers drummed on the door panel, the confidence she'd worn like armour beginning to crack. Around us, the air felt heavier, the quiet street holding its breath. Even the boy on the bike had inched closer, pretending to check his chain while not taking his eyes off us. And in that silence, I realised she was starting to understand that this conversation wasn't going to end the way she thought. She tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin and forced. "Well, I'm sure whatever you're talking about doesn't really concern me. I've lived in this neighbourhood for years, and I know all the right people." "That's so?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "The mayor, half the city council, they know me. I've had lunch with them. I've been very vocal about keeping this area the way it's supposed to be." Her voice carried down the block, and I noticed a few more neighbours stepping outside, probably curious about the small gathering forming. Some leaned on their porches, others crossed their arms, listening without getting too close. I took a slow breath. Interesting, because the way it works, the people you mentioned, they usually take advice from the department I work in before making those kinds of decisions. She blinked, her mouth parting just slightly. "And that would be?" "City Infrastructure and Public Works," I said evenly. "The place that reviews building permits, property modifications and, well, community projects." Her hand froze on the wheel. "You're making it sound like you have something to do with—" "I do," I said simply. "In fact, the project I was out here reviewing today involves this very street." The murmurs from the small crowd grew louder. I caught the eye of the older woman still standing with her tote bag by the library door. She gave me the smallest nod, like she understood more than she was letting on. The driver's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't speak. She was too busy running through whatever mental list she had of things on her property she didn't want the city looking at too closely. I didn't need to rush her. Sometimes silence says more than any lecture could. And right now, she was hearing it loud and clear. She shifted in her seat, the leather creaking under her. One hand tightened around the steering wheel while the other smoothed down her hair, even though it was already perfect. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it," she said, her voice dropping just enough to sound almost defensive. "I was just making conversation." "Is that what you call it?" I asked, my tone calm but steady. Her eyes darted toward the end of the block, then back to me. The boy on the bike finally set his kickstand down and stood beside it, his arms resting on the handlebars. The older woman by the library took a slow step closer, her eyes fixed on the driver. A man from across the street, still wearing his work gloves, came out and leaned against his fence. None of them spoke, but their presence said plenty. The driver glanced around again, her fingers tapping an unsteady rhythm on the steering wheel. "I've worked hard for my home," she said quickly. "I take care of this neighbourhood. I just don't want it to change." I held her gaze. Change isn't always bad, and the people you think don't belong, they're part of what keeps a community alive. Her jaw tightened. She shifted again, crossing one leg over the other as if settling in would make her more comfortable, but her grip on the wheel never loosened. I could almost see her thinking about the phone call I'd just made, the mention of her address, the fact that her property file might be sitting on someone's desk by the end of the day. Behind me, the older woman finally spoke. "Ma'am," she said gently, "I think you owe her an apology." It was quiet enough to hear the soft patter of water dripping from the library's awning into the gutter. The driver's eyes flicked toward the woman, then back to me. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath. I didn't push, I didn't need to. The truth was already settling in around her like the damp air after the rain, cold, heavy, and impossible to ignore. I held the folder a little tighter, making sure the damp pages didn't slide out. "You know," I said, keeping my tone even, "places like this library aren't just for the people who live in the biggest houses. They're for kids riding their bikes here after school. They're for older folks who can't drive anymore. They're for families who want to feel like they belong." The man at the fence gave the smallest nod. The boy with the bike shifted his weight, still watching. The driver's eyes darted to the growing number of faces watching from porches and sidewalks. Her fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel, then stopped when she realized they were shaking. She gave a quick, nervous laugh. "That's not what I meant. I let her trail off. "Maybe so," I said, "but sometimes the way things come out says more than we think." She shifted in her seat, uncrossing and recrossing her legs, glancing at the gear shift like she was weighing whether to leave. But the small crowd around us had closed that option without saying a word. The older woman with the tote bag spoke again, her voice gentle. "Communities work better when people look out for each other." I gave her a small smile, then looked back at the driver. "That's all anyone really wants here." The driver swallowed hard, her knuckles pale against the wheel. Whatever pride she had started with was slipping, replaced by the quiet realization that this wasn't going her way, and that everyone could see it. She cleared her throat, trying to sound casual, but the edge in her voice gave her away. "So, what exactly do you do for work?" I took my time answering, adjusting the folder in my arms, feeling the damp paper shift inside. "I work with the city's public works department. My team reviews building permits, property modifications, and makes sure projects follow the rules. Big projects, small ones, even private homes." Her grip on the steering wheel didn't loosen. "And you know my address?" "I do," I said simply. "It's part of my job to know the details of every property in the neighbourhoods I'm assigned to. And yours? Well, it's come across my desk a few times recently." Her eyes flickered. "For what?" I tilted my head slightly, my tone still calm. "Let's just say I'm aware of a few changes you've made without the proper approvals. A deck extension, a fence line that looks interesting, maybe even an interior conversion or two." She opened her mouth, then shut it again. The man at the fence raised an eyebrow. The boy by his bike leaned forward just slightly, as if this had suddenly turned into the most interesting thing he'd heard all week. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You see, when someone files a complaint or draws attention to themselves, it's our responsibility to make sure everything connected to that property is in order. The truth was, I hadn't planned on doing any of this today. But sometimes life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be to see things clearly. Her eyes darted to the small crowd, then back to me. The confident smirk from earlier was gone. All that was left was the realization that she'd picked the wrong person on the wrong day in front of the wrong audience. The street was quiet except for the sound of water dripping from the trees. She kept glancing around, like she was hoping someone would come to her defense, but no one did. The man at the fence didn't look away. The older woman from the library had moved closer, her tote bag now resting at her feet. Even the boy with the bike stayed planted where he was, his eyes wide. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," the driver said finally, though her voice was softer now, the sharp edges gone. "It was just water," I nodded slowly. "Yes, just water. And words, but you and I both know it was more than that." Her mouth opened, then closed again. The silence between us stretched until it was almost uncomfortable. Somewhere down the street, a screen door creaked open, and another neighbour stepped out onto their porch. She ran a hand over her hair, trying to steady herself. "So what happens now?" "That depends," I said. "Sometimes things can be worked out. Other times, they need to be looked at more closely, and I think we both know your property is worth a closer look." A murmur went through the small crowd. The man at the fence exchanged a glance with the older woman. No one said it out loud, but I could feel the shift. This wasn't about a puddle anymore. It was about the way people treat each other when they think no one is watching. The driver's shoulders sank. Her eyes dropped for the first time, no longer meeting mine. "I didn't think it mattered." "It always matters," I said gently. "Because the way we treat strangers says more about us than anything else." Her fingers tightened on the wheel again. But this time it wasn't about control. It was about holding herself together in front of the people who had just seen her stripped of all the confidence she'd walked in with. I shifted the folder under my arm, still feeling the weight of the damp paper inside. "Whether I'm here for work or just passing through," I said quietly, "you could have handled this differently." She didn't say anything, but her eyes went to the small crowd. The man at the fence stayed where he was, arms crossed. The older woman with the tote bag gave her a steady look. Even the boy by his bike didn't move. "I'll be following up on those property records," I added. "That's just my job. But maybe think about how you treat the next person you meet. You never really know who they are, or what kind of day they've already had." She gave the smallest nod, like she wasn't ready to speak, but couldn't pretend anymore. I glanced at the neighbours. "Thanks for being out here," I said. The older woman picked up her tote bag and smiled, and for the first time all morning I felt the air lighten just a little. Turning toward the library, I started walking. My clothes were still damp, but that didn't bother me. Some things dry on their own. Behind me, the engine started. No roar this time, no sudden speed, just a slow pull away from the curb, past the puddle that still shimmered in the light. Sometimes the real shift doesn't happen in an office or a meeting. It happens right there on the sidewalk when someone realizes they might need to do things differently.